Obese girl took bullet for Mafia boss's daughter. He is immediately obsessed with her. The ballroom pulsed with a false, dangerous glamour. Zoe tracked Gia through the crowd, unable to shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. A sharp noise, a waiter's sneer, "Watch it, fatty," drew her attention away for a split second. When she returned her focus, she saw Gia speaking to an elderly man by the grand windows. Something about his posture made Zoe's skin prickle. Then, the explosion. The windows shattered inward, showering guests with glass. Screams erupted as gunfire followed, tearing through the smoke and chaos. Zoe's training took over. She sprinted toward Gia. Through the mayhem, she saw it. The glint of a gun aimed directly at Gia's head. There was no time for thought, only action. "Gia! Down!" Zoe launched her massive frame forward, shoving Gia to the marble floor just as the shot rang out. White-hot pain exploded in Zoe's shoulder, spinning her around. She hit the ground hard, her vision blurring with the impact. More gunshots, more screams. Through the haze of pain, she saw Gia's terrified face above her. "Zoe! Oh God, Zoe!" Heavy footsteps approached. Zoe tried to move, to shield Gia again, but her body wouldn't cooperate. A chilling shadow fell over them both. Victor Salvatore himself. His face was a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene. "Dad!" Gia's voice cracked. "She saved me! The bullet was meant for me!" Zoe's world was growing dim, but she couldn't miss the intensity in Victor's steel-gray eyes as he knelt beside her. His presence was overwhelming, dangerous, yet somehow grounding. Blood soaked her dress, but all she could focus on was his gaze, like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice low and fierce. "Medical team now!" He barked into the surrounding chaos. The pain was unbearable. Zoe fought to stay conscious, her focus clinging to the unreadable expression in his eyes. It was the last thing she saw before consciousness slipped away. And everything faded to black. The harsh fluorescent lights of the medical suite cast shadows across Victor's face as he watched the medical team work frantically over Zoe's unconscious form. Blood stained the pristine white sheets beneath her, a stark reminder of her sacrifice. The bullet had torn through her shoulder, missing vital organs but causing significant damage. Victor stood at the foot of the bed, his presence commanding even in silence. His steel-gray eyes never left Zoe's face, studying the woman who had thrown herself in front of his daughter without hesitation. She was different from anyone in his world, soft where others were hard, genuine where others were false. "Sir," the doctor approached cautiously. "She's stabilized, but she'll need careful monitoring through the night." Victor gave a curt nod, his jaw clenched. The scent of antiseptic burned his nostrils, mixing with the metallic tang of blood that still lingered in the air. His hands, usually steady, twitched at his sides as he fought the unfamiliar urge to reach out and touch her. Through the large windows of the medical suite, the night sky stretched endlessly black, matching his mood. His security team had swept the compound twice, hunting for any remaining threats. The attack had been well planned, but the target remained unclear. Was it Gia, or had they aimed for him? But this woman, this unlikely guardian, had changed everything with one selfless act. "Leave us," Victor commanded, his voice cutting through the quiet beeping of medical equipment. The medical staff scattered like leaves in the wind, leaving him alone with their unconscious patient. Victor moved closer, studying Zoe's features. In sleep, her face held a vulnerability that stirred something protective in him, something possessive. His fingers traced the edge of the bed, inches from her hand but not quite touching. "You've complicated things," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Marco, his head of security, entered with measured steps. "The perimeter is secure, boss. We've stationed guards at every entrance." Victor straightened, his expression hardening. "Double the security. No one gets near this room without my explicit permission. And find me everything there is to know about her." "Already done, sir." Marco handed over a thin file. "Zoe Thompson, 26 years old, no family, clean record. She's been working security for private clients for the past 3 years. Nothing remarkable except she took a bullet for my daughter." Victor's voice carried an edge that made Marco step back. "That makes her remarkable enough." The heart monitor beeped steadily, a rhythm that seemed to echo in Victor's chest. He opened the file, scanning through the sparse details of Zoe's life. Something about her ordinary existence made her extraordinary act even more intriguing. "She stays," Victor declared, closing the file with finality. "Once she recovers, arrange suitable accommodations in the East Wing." Marco's eyebrows rose slightly, but he knew better than to question Victor's decisions. "Yes, sir, and the debt will be settled on my terms." Victor's tone left no room for discussion. As Marco left, Victor resumed his vigil. The medical machines created a symphony of electronic hums and beeps, monitoring every breath, every heartbeat of the woman who had unwittingly entered his world. His mind raced with possibilities, with plans, with the dark satisfaction of knowing she was now tied to him through blood and debt. The attack had shaken his carefully constructed world, but Zoe's presence had shifted something fundamental within it. Within him, she would recover under his protection, whether she wanted it or not. And when she woke, she would learn that in his world, debts were always collected. Victor's fingers finally made contact with her hand, just barely brushing against her skin. "Welcome to my world, Zoe Thompson," he whispered, his voice carrying both promise and threat. The first thing Zoe noticed was the softness beneath her. Too soft. Her own bed at home felt like cardboard compared to this cloud-like mattress. Pain shot through her side as she tried to move, forcing a weak groan from her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim golden light. This wasn't a hospital room. Rich burgundy wallpaper adorned the walls, and heavy velvet drapes framed floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, their light catching on gilded mirrors and ornate furniture that looked more suited to a palace than a recovery room. "Don't move." The deep voice made her freeze. Victor Salvatore emerged from a darkened corner, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. His expensive suit was immaculate, but his face showed signs of fatigue. Shadows under his steel-gray eyes, a tightness around his mouth. "Where am I?" Zoe's voice came out raspy. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "My private residence." Victor moved closer, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. "You've been unconscious for 2 days." Memories flooded back. The gala, the gunshots, Gia's terrified face. "Is Gia?" "My daughter is safe, thanks to you." His words should have sounded grateful, but instead they carried an edge of something else. Possession, ownership. Victor reached the bedside, towering over her. "You took a bullet meant for her. The doctor says you're lucky. It missed any vital organs." Zoe tried to sit up again, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I need to go home." "No." The single word fell like a stone between them. "You're under my protection now." "Protection?" Zoe's heart began to race. "I don't need." "You saved my daughter's life." Victor cut her off. "That makes you valuable, and everything valuable to me stays close." His eyes raked over her, calculating and cold. "You belong to me now." The words sent a chill down her spine. "I don't belong to anyone." Zoe said, her voice stronger now, fueled by anger. She pushed herself up, ignoring the stabbing pain. I need to leave. Victor's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but the steel in his grip was unmistakable. You misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation. Zoe tried to pull away, but his hold tightened. You can't keep me here against my will. A dark smile curved Victor's lips. I can do whatever I want. He released her wrist but remained close, his presence suffocating. You owe me a life debt now. The only way out is death, yours or mine, and I don't plan on dying anytime soon. This is insane, Zoe whispered, her mind racing for options, finding none. I was just doing my job. And now you have a new job. Victor straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. You'll stay here, under my protection. My men will guard you. Your needs will be met. But make no mistake, try to leave, and there will be consequences. Zoe's hands clenched in the silk sheets, rage and fear warring in her chest. She looked around the opulent room again, seeing it for what it truly was, a beautiful prison. Victor moved toward the door, pausing to speak to the guards visible in the hallway. Watch her. She doesn't leave this room without my permission. His eyes found hers, one last time, hard as granite. Welcome to your new life, Zoe. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded more final than a slam. Zoe stared at it, her body trembling with fury and the dawning realization that she was trapped. The Mafia boss's words echoed in her mind. She belonged to him now. Her act of protection had become her sentence, and Victor Salvatore held all the keys to her cage. The steady beep of medical monitors filled the luxurious bedroom where Zoe lay recovering. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's lights twinkled like stars. A beautiful view that felt more like a taunt than a comfort. She shifted in the silk sheets, wincing as pain shot through her shoulder where the bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. The door opened without warning. Victor Salvatore's imposing figure filled the doorframe, his presence immediately charging the air with tension. His steel-gray eyes swept over her, clinical and cold, yet something else lurked beneath his controlled expression. The doctor says you're healing well, he said, his voice low and controlled. He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. Zoe's heart raced, but she refused to show fear. I don't need your doctors, or your silk sheets, or your guards watching my every move. A ghost of a smile touched Victor's lips. And yet, here you are. He reached for her chart at the foot of the bed, his expensive suit rustling with the movement. Your dedication to my daughter is unexpected. I was doing my job, Zoe replied firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. Victor's eyes snapped to hers, intense and searching. No, your job was to call for backup and wait for security. Instead, you took a bullet meant for her. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. Why? Zoe met his gaze steadily, despite the flutter in her stomach. Because it was right. Because Gia deserves to live. She paused, gathering her courage. Not everything is about power plays and debts, Mr. Salvatore. Something flickered in Victor's expression, surprise, perhaps, or admiration. He rarely encountered people brave enough to speak to him so directly. His fingers drummed against the wooden footboard, a rare display of restlessness. You're different, he murmured, almost to himself. His eyes traced over her face, lingering on the determination in her expression, the strength that radiated from her despite her vulnerable position. Zoe watched as Victor paced the room, his usual iron control seeming to waver. She noticed the way his shoulders tensed when he looked at her bandages, the slight clench of his jaw when the monitors beeped. It was as if her injury personally offended him. Mr. Salvatore, she began, but he cut her off. Victor, he corrected, his voice rougher than usual. After taking a bullet for my daughter, you've earned that much. The admission seemed to cost him something, and Zoe glimpsed a flash of the man beneath the monster. Someone who had lost everything once and built walls to prevent it from happening again. His eyes held shadows of old pain, quickly masked but unmistakably there. I don't want to be here, Zoe said quietly, honestly. This isn't my world. Victor's expression hardened, but something vulnerable lingered in his eyes. You made it your world the moment you saved Gia. He moved closer, until he stood beside her bed. You're under my protection now. Nothing will harm you here. The irony wasn't lost on Zoe, being protected by the very man who terrified her. Yet, as she studied him, she saw the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted her IV line, the gentleness he tried to hide beneath his commanding presence. Your loyalty to Gia, he continued, his voice softer now. It reminds me of... He trailed off, pain flashing across his face before disappearing behind his usual mask. Zoe knew he was thinking of his murdered family, the tragedy that had turned him into the ruthless man before her. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Victor's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. His walls slammed back into place, but his eyes lingered on her face. Rest, he commanded, though his tone lacked its usual bite. You'll need your strength. The marble floors echoed with their footsteps as Victor guided Zoe through the grand hallway of his downtown office building. His hand rested on the small of her back, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his palm. The gesture seemed protective, but Zoe knew better. This was about control. Stay close, Victor commanded, his voice low and cold. What you're about to see isn't meant for outsiders. Zoe's heart hammered against her ribs. She was dressed in clothes Victor had provided, a black designer dress that somehow fit her curves perfectly, though she felt exposed and vulnerable. The guard detail surrounding them made her feel like a prisoner being escorted to her cell. The conference room doors opened to reveal a dozen men in expensive suits, their faces hard and weathered by years in the criminal underworld. The room fell silent as Victor entered. Zoe watched as grown men scrambled to stand, their eyes downcast in deference to his authority. Victor guided her to a leather chair beside his at the head of the table. Sit, he ordered, and Zoe complied, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. The meeting began, and Zoe's stomach turned as she listened to casual discussions of territory disputes, protection rackets, and worse. Victor's voice remained eerily calm as he ordered hits on rival families, his fingers drumming methodically on the polished wood. The Moretti family needs a reminder of their place, Victor stated, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. Their latest shipment will never reach its destination. Make sure there are no survivors. Zoe's hands trembled in her lap. She tried to keep her face neutral, but when one man mentioned cleaning up loose ends, a euphemism for murder, she couldn't suppress her flinch. Victor's hand found her knee under the table, his grip firm. Whether it was meant to comfort or restrain, Zoe couldn't tell. His thumb traced small circles on her skin, the intimate gesture at odds with the brutality of his words. Is there a problem? Victor's question cut through the room, directed at a man who had been staring at Zoe too long. No, boss, the man quickly replied, but his eyes lingered on Zoe for a moment too long. Victor's grip tightened on her knee. Then I suggest you focus on the business at hand. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The meeting continued, but Zoe felt disconnected from her body, floating above the scene like a ghost. She watched herself sitting there, trapped beside one of the most dangerous men in the city, as he orchestrated violence with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. When Victor finally stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Zoe's legs felt weak. She rose unsteadily, aware of his hand returning to her back, this time making contact. His touch burned through the fabric of her dress. "I hope you understand now," Victor murmured as they exited, his lips close to her ear. "This is my world, your world now, too." The hallway seemed longer on the way out, each step carrying Zoe deeper into a reality she never wanted. The guards flanked them silently, a reminder that she was as much a prisoner as she was protected. Victor's phone rang, and he answered it with his free hand, never breaking stride. Zoe listened as he switched effortlessly between English and Italian, knowing that each word probably carried orders for more violence, more death. In the elevator, Zoe caught their reflection in the mirrored walls. Victor stood tall and imposing beside her, his dark suit immaculate, his presence commanding. She looked small next to him, despite her size. A bird caught in a predator's grasp. His eyes met hers in the reflection, and something flickered across his face. Possession, obsession, or perhaps something darker. The message was clear. This was her life now, bound to a man who dealt in death as easily as others dealt in stocks and bonds. There would be no escape from Victor Salvatore's world. The moonlight cast long shadows through the mansion's windows as Zoe crept down the hallway. Her heart thundered in her chest, each step carefully placed to avoid the creaking floorboards she'd mapped out during her week of observation. The guards changed shifts at exactly 2 a.m., a small window of opportunity she couldn't waste. She'd memorized their patterns, watched their rotations, and waited for this moment. Her palms were sweaty as she pressed against the cool wall, holding her breath as footsteps echoed in the distance. The guard passed, and she counted to 10 before moving again. The service entrance was just ahead. Zoe had seen the kitchen staff use it during deliveries. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle, hope rising in her chest for the first time in days. "Going somewhere?" The voice froze her blood, low, dangerous, and terrifyingly familiar. Victor stepped out of the shadows, his presence filling the narrow hallway like a predator cornering its prey. Zoe stumbled backward, her escape plan crumbling before her eyes. I can't stay here," she whispered. But the words sounded weak even to her own ears. Victor moved with frightening speed. Before she could react, his hand was around her throat, pushing her against the wall. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. His fingers weren't tight enough to choke her, but the threat was clear in his iron grip. "You think you can leave me?" His voice was eerily calm, a contrast to the rage burning in his eyes. "After everything I've given you? After I saved your life?" Zoe clawed at his hand, her size meaning nothing against his strength. "Please," she gasped. "I'm not meant for this world, your world." Victor leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You became part of my world the moment you took that bullet for my daughter." His free hand came up to brush away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. The gentle gesture was somehow more terrifying than his grip on her throat. "You're mine now, Zoe. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." She saw it then, the possessiveness in his eyes, the way his gaze lingered on her face. This wasn't just about debt or obligation. Something darker lurked beneath his controlled exterior, something that made her pulse race with equal parts fear and something else she didn't want to name. "You will never leave me," Victor continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to caress her skin. "I won't allow it. You belong here, with me, whether you understand that yet or not." His hand released her throat but immediately gripped her arm, pulling her away from the wall. "Guards!" he called out, and immediately 2 men appeared, as if they'd been waiting just around the corner. "Take her to the East Wing," Make sure she's comfortable, but secure. Zoe struggled against their hold, but it was useless. Victor watched her with those cold eyes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of emotion she couldn't quite read. "Let this be a lesson," he said as the guards began to drag her away. "Every attempt to leave will be met with consequences. I'm not a patient man, Zoe, but for you—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "For you, I'll wait until you understand your place here." The last thing she saw before being led away was Victor's face, a mix of fury and something that looked almost like pain. His words echoed in her mind, "You will never leave me." And the most terrifying part wasn't the threat in those words. It was the way they made her heart skip a beat. Despite everything, the heavy door to Victor's study creaked open, and Zoe's heart hammered against her ribs. After days of isolation, the simple act of walking made her legs feel weak. Victor stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. The city lights sparkled behind him like 1,000 watching eyes. "Sit," he commanded, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Zoe sank into the leather armchair, her hands clutching the armrests. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. "I—" Victor started, then stopped. He turned, and for the first time, Zoe saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "I shouldn't have reacted that way." The words came out stiff, like they physically pained him. Zoe's breath caught in her throat. Was Victor Salvatore, the feared Mafia boss, actually apologizing? "You tried to leave." His jaw clenched. "Nobody leaves. You can't keep people prisoner just because I can do whatever I want." He cut in, but there was something different in his tone, less cruel, more frustrated. He ran a hand through his dark hair. "But with you, it's different. You make me—" He struggled with the words. "You make me lose control." Zoe watched as he paced, his movements like a caged predator. "Nobody stands up to me. Nobody dares to look me in the eye and challenge me. But you—" He stopped in front of her chair, looming over her. "You're not afraid." "I am afraid," Zoe admitted quietly. "I'd be stupid not to be. But I won't let fear control me." Something changed in Victor's expression. He crouched down to her level, his ice-blue eyes searching her face. "That's what makes you dangerous, Zoe. That's what makes you—" He trailed off, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek but stopping short. "What happened to your family?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. She'd heard whispers, seen the pain that sometimes flashed across his face when Gia mentioned her grandparents. Victor's entire body went rigid. For a moment, Zoe thought he might storm out or lash out in anger. Instead, he stood and walked back to the window. "They were murdered," he said, his voice hollow. "Right in front of me. I was 18. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass. "My father's closest friend betrayed us, led the rival family right to our dinner table." Zoe's heart ached at the raw pain in his voice. "Victor, I watched them die," he continued, his words barely above a whisper. "My mother, my father, my little sister," his fist clenched at his side. "I survived only because my father's bodyguard got me out. I spent the next 5 years hunting down every person involved. I made them suffer before they died." The confession hung heavy in the air. Zoe understood now. The walls he'd built, the control he desperately maintained, the violence that came so easily to him, it didn't excuse his actions, but it explained them. "That's why you keep everyone at arm's length," she said softly. "Why you don't trust anyone." Victor turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. "Trust gets you killed in my world." He moved closer, his steps measured. "But you!" You took a bullet for my daughter. You had nothing to gain, everything to lose, and you still did it." He reached out again, and this time his fingers brushed her cheek. The touch sent electricity through her skin. "I don't know what to do with you, Zoe. I don't know why I can't just let you go." The tenderness in his touch contrasted sharply with the dangerous man she knew he was. Zoe remained still, caught between fear and something else, something that made her pulse race for entirely different reasons. The glittering chandeliers of the Grande Hotel ballroom cast golden light across the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses. Zoe fidgeted with the hem of her black evening gown, feeling exposed despite its modest cut. Victor had insisted she wear it, had it specially made for her curves. But standing here among Milano's elite, she felt like an imposter. Victor's hand pressed against her lower back, firm and possessive. "Stop fidgeting," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You belong here now." She suppressed a shiver at his touch. After days of isolation, this sudden public appearance felt overwhelming. Victor had arrived at her room earlier, presenting the dress like an offering. "You'll accompany me tonight," he'd said. Not a request. Never a request with him. The ballroom buzzed with whispered conversations and calculating stares. Everyone knew who Victor was, what he represented. The king of Milano's underworld, displaying his newest acquisition. Zoe caught fragments of hushed Italian, the word grassa, fat, repeated with sneers barely hidden behind champagne flutes. Victor's grip tightened, as if sensing her discomfort. "Ignore them," he commanded softly. "They're beneath you." A waiter approached with a tray of drinks. Victor reached for a glass, but Zoe saw it first. The slight tremor in the waiter's hand, the way his eyes darted to the exit. Before she could shout a warning, the glass shattered on the marble floor. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Victor moved to shield her, but Zoe was faster. She slammed into him, knocking them both behind a marble column as bullets sprayed across the room. Screams filled the air as party guests scattered in panic. "Stay down!" Victor growled, reaching for his concealed weapon. But Zoe saw the second gunman emerging from behind the bar, taking aim at Victor's exposed back. Without thinking, she launched herself at Victor again, tackling him fully to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. Pain exploded across her shoulder, a graze, but enough to draw blood. They rolled together behind an overturned table, Victor's body now covering hers protectively. The firefight was brutal but brief. Victor's security team emerged from the chaos like shadows, efficiently eliminating the threats, but Zoe barely registered it. Too aware of Victor's weight pressing her into the floor, his heart hammering against her chest. "You stupid, brave woman," he snarled, but his hands were gentle as they checked her for injuries. When his fingers found the blood on her shoulder, his face transformed into something terrifying. "They touched you. They dared to touch what's mine." "I'm fine," Zoe gasped, trying to sit up. "It's just a graze." But Victor wasn't listening. His eyes had gone cold with fury as he barked orders in Italian to his men. The bodies of their attackers were already being dragged away, the hotel staff hurriedly ushering out remaining guests. "Sir," one of his men approached, "the perimeter is secured. We've identified them as Castellano's men." Victor's jaw clenched. Without warning, he scooped Zoe into his arms, ignoring her protests. "We're leaving. Now." As he carried her through the chaos of the emptying ballroom, Zoe realized something had shifted. The way he held her wasn't just protective, it was possessive, desperate. She'd seen him kill without hesitation, had witnessed his cruelty. But this was different. The man carrying her wasn't just the cold Mafia boss anymore. He was something more dangerous, a man afraid of losing something precious. And as they reached his armored car, Zoe felt her own revelation settle like lead in her stomach. She wasn't just his captive anymore. Whether she liked it or not, she was becoming something else to him, something that made him vulnerable. And in his world, vulnerability meant death. Through the vast windows of Victor's study, the setting sun cast long shadows across the marble floors. Zoe sat in one of the leather armchairs, trying to maintain her composure while Victor paced behind his desk. His presence filled the room like a gathering storm. "You can't keep avoiding me," Victor said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge she'd come to recognize. "I see how you turn away when I enter a room." Zoe's fingers twisted in her lap. "I'm not avoiding you. I just need space to think." Victor stopped pacing, his steel-gray eyes fixing on her. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Space?" He walked around the desk, each step deliberate. "You think I haven't noticed how you flinch when I'm near? How you try to schedule your meals when I'm in meetings? Can you blame me?" Zoe's voice trembled slightly. "After everything that's happened?" Instead of answering, Victor settled into the chair across from her. His usual coldness seemed to slip, revealing something raw underneath. "Tell me what you're thinking." The request surprised her. It wasn't a demand or an order. It was almost gentle. Zoe looked up, meeting his eyes. "I'm thinking that I don't understand you. One moment you're threatening me. The next you're different. Like now." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The position made him seem almost vulnerable. "Different how?" "Human," she whispered. "You show me glimpses of someone who isn't just the cold-blooded killer everyone fears." A muscle twitched in Victor's jaw. "Perhaps that's because you're the only one who sees past the monster." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me without fear or agenda?" The loneliness in his voice struck something in Zoe's chest. Despite her better judgment, she felt her walls cracking. "Is that why you keep me here? Because I see you differently?" "I keep you here because you're mine now," Victor said, but the words lacked their usual harshness. "But yes, perhaps that's part of it." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Zoe could feel her resolve weakening. Every time she tried to hate him, to maintain her emotional distance, he showed her these glimpses of humanity that made her heart ache. "The attack at the gala," Victor suddenly said, his voice dropping lower. "It wasn't random." Zoe's attention snapped to him. "What do you mean?" Victor's expression darkened. "Someone close to me orchestrated it. Someone I trusted." His hands clenched into fists. "They wanted to hurt me by targeting what's mine." The implication sent a chill down Zoe's spine. "You're telling me this because I trust you," Victor cut in, his eyes intense. "Despite everything, despite your attempts to run, you've proven your loyalty, not just with Gia, but with me too." The admission hung heavy in the air. Zoe felt her heart racing, torn between the fear his world inspired and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. This man, who could order death with a single nod, was sharing his vulnerabilities with her. Victor stood, moving to stand before her chair. His presence loomed over her, but it didn't feel threatening. Instead, it felt protective. "No one will hurt you," he said, his voice thick with promise. "I won't allow it. You're under my protection now, more than ever." Zoe looked up at him, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes. She should be terrified of his possessiveness. But instead, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. This dangerous man, with all his power and darkness, was showing her a side of himself that no one else got to see. "Victor," she whispered, not sure what else to say. His hand reached out, fingers ghosting along her cheek. The touch was gentle, at odds with everything she knew about him. "You're mine to protect," he murmured. "Mine to keep safe. Do you understand?" The study felt too small for Victor's rage. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, staring at the surveillance photos spread before him. Each image told the same story: betrayal. Marco Rossi, his right-hand man for the past decade, the man who had helped him build his empire, who had stood beside him at his parents' funeral, who had sworn blood loyalty to the Salvatore family. Victor's jaw clenched as he studied the time-stamped photos. There was Marco, meeting with members of the Romano family, their bitter rivals, in secret locations across the city. The final photo showed money changing hands just hours before the attack at the gala. "Are you certain?" Victor's voice was deadly quiet. His security chief nodded. "Multiple sources confirmed it, boss. Marco's been feeding information to the Romanos for months. The attack at the gala, he knew exactly where you'd be standing." The crystal tumbler of whiskey on Victor's desk shattered in his grip, amber liquid mixing with blood from his cut palm. He barely noticed the pain. Zoe, who had been quietly observing from a corner of the study, stepped forward with a cloth napkin. Without thinking, she reached for his bleeding hand. Victor stiffened at her touch but didn't pull away. "Let me help," she said softly, dabbing at the blood. Her gentle touch was at odds with the violence churning inside him. Victor watched her face as she worked, noting the concern in her eyes. She should be afraid. Everyone else was when he was like this. But instead, she was trying to take care of him. "Marco was there the night my parents died," Victor said, his voice rough. "He helped me hunt down the killers. He held me back when I wanted to throw myself into their graves." Zoe's hands stilled. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most." Victor's dark eyes locked onto hers. "Is that what you think I'll do to you? Hurt you? I think you already have," she answered honestly. "But I also think you're trying not to." A muscle ticked in Victor's jaw. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. The message made his blood run cold. "Marco knows we're onto him," Victor said, his voice shifting to something dangerous and cold. "He's making his move tonight." Zoe stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing. "What kind of move?" "The kind that ends with bodies." Victor moved to his wall safe, inputting a code. "You'll stay here, under heavy guard. I need to handle this personally." "Victor," Zoe's voice was hesitant, "the last time someone betrayed you, you lost your family. Don't let anger cloud your judgment." He paused, one hand on the safe door. "Are you worried about me, little one?" "I'm worried about what this revenge will cost you." Victor turned to face her fully, his expression unreadable. "The price of betrayal is always blood." Marco knew that when he chose his side. He crossed the room to her in 3 long strides, his hand coming up to cup her face. "But you're right about one thing. I lost my family once. I won't lose anyone else I care about." The intensity in his eyes made Zoe's breath catch. Before she could process his words, the study door burst open. One of Victor's guards stumbled in, bleeding from a head wound. "Boss! Marco's men! They're inside the compound!" Victor's expression hardened into something terrible. He pushed Zoe behind him just as the first gunshot rang out, and the night erupted into chaos. Victor paced the length of his office, his footsteps heavy against the polished marble floor. The betrayal of his most trusted lieutenant had shaken him more than he cared to admit. His jaw clenched as he barked orders into his phone, initiating an immediate lockdown of the compound. Zoe sat in one of the leather chairs, watching him with wary eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop with each passing second as Victor's rage grew more palpable. His broad shoulders were taut with tension, and his usually controlled demeanor showed cracks of raw fury. "No one leaves, no one enters," he commanded, his voice like ice. "Double the security detail around Zoe's quarters." "I don't need extra guards," Zoe protested, but her words died in her throat when Victor turned to face her. His dark eyes burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You don't understand," he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He braced his hands on the arms of her chair, caging her in. "Marco didn't just betray me. He's been watching you, reporting your movements. Every detail about you." The proximity between them was electric. Zoe could smell his expensive cologne, could see the subtle flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs as his gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second. "Why would he care about me?" she whispered. Victor's hand moved to her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "Because you're my weakness," he admitted, his voice rough. "And they all know it." The confession hung heavy in the air between them. Zoe couldn't look away from him, couldn't ignore the heat that bloomed wherever his skin touched hers. This was dangerous. More dangerous than any bullet or threat she'd faced. "Victor," she breathed, unsure if she was warning him or pleading with him. He pulled back abruptly, running a hand through his dark hair. The loss of his touch left her cold, but the tension remained, crackling like electricity before a storm. "You'll stay in my private wing," he decided, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's the most secure area of the compound. No one gets in without my explicit permission." Zoe stood, her legs slightly unsteady. "And what about you?" Victor's eyes darkened at her question. He moved closer again, and this time when his hand found her waist, the touch was possessive. "I'll be close, very close." The implications of his words made her stomach flip. She should have been terrified. This was the man who had essentially imprisoned her, who had killed without hesitation. But instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, drawn to the heat of his body like a moth to flame. "I can't lose you," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. His fingers tightened on her waist. "I won't." The raw honesty in his voice made her chest ache. This wasn't the cold, calculating Mafia boss she'd first met. This was something else, something that made her pulse race and her resolve weaken. His phone buzzed, breaking the moment. Victor stepped back, his mask of control sliding back into place, but his eyes remained fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "My men will escort you to the new quarters," he said, his voice steady but still holding an edge of something darker, something hungry. "Don't fight them on this, Zoe, please." It was the please that undid her, such a small word from a man who never asked, only commanded. She nodded, and relief flickered across his features before being replaced by his usual stoic expression. As she followed the guards to her new location, Zoe could still feel the ghost of Victor's touch on her skin, could still see the way he'd looked at her. She was falling for him, she realized with a mix of terror and exhilaration, falling for a man who dealt in death and darkness, who held her captive and yet protected her with frightening intensity. The dining room felt different tonight. Zoe noticed it immediately as she entered. The usual cold opulence had been transformed into something more intimate. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses, casting warm shadows on the dark mahogany table. Only 2 place settings were arranged at one end, close enough that conversation would be unavoidable. Victor stood as she entered, his usual sharp suit replaced by a more casual black sweater that somehow made him look both softer and more dangerous. His eyes tracked her movements as she approached, making her heart flutter despite her best efforts to remain calm. "Sit," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "I thought we could have dinner. Just us." Zoe lowered herself into the chair, hyper-aware of his proximity as he pushed it in for her. His fingers brushed her shoulder, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. She watched as he moved to his own seat, his movements fluid and controlled. "You didn't have to do this," she said, fingers fidgeting with the heavy linen napkin. "I wanted to." Victor poured wine into her glass, the deep red liquid catching the candlelight. "After everything that's happened, I thought we could use a moment of peace." The first course arrived, a delicate soup that smelled of herbs and comfort. Zoe took a spoonful, surprised by how hungry she felt. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with unspoken words. "Tell me about your childhood," Victor said suddenly, his voice low. "Before all this." Zoe paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. It wasn't anything special, just normal, I guess, until it wasn't. "Tell me anyway." She set her spoon down, considering. "I grew up in a small house with peeling paint. My mom worked 2 jobs. Kids at school were cruel about my weight. But home was safe. We didn't have much, but Mom always made sure I felt loved." Victor's expression softened slightly. "And now?" "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." Zoe swallowed hard. "That's when I started working security jobs. Needed the money." Victor nodded, reaching across the table to refill her wine glass. His fingers brushed hers as he pulled back, lingering for just a moment too long. "I understand loss," he said quietly. "Your family," Zoe prompted gently, surprised by her own boldness. Victor's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "I was 18 when they were killed. My father, mother, younger sister." His voice was controlled, but Zoe could hear the pain beneath it. "A rival family thought they could take what was ours. They were wrong. Is that why you became—" Zoe gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "This?" A dark smile crossed his face. "No, I was always meant for this life. But losing them, it changed how I ruled, made me harder, colder." His eyes met hers across the table. "Until recently." Heat crept up Zoe's neck. She reached for her wine glass, needing something to do with her hands. Victor's presence felt overwhelming, like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "You make me question things," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Things I've believed for years." Before Zoe could respond, Victor reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, surprisingly gentle for someone capable of such violence. Her breath caught in her throat as his thumb traced small circles on her palm. "I don't know what this is," he said, eyes fixed on their joined hands, "but I can't ignore it anymore." Zoe's heart pounded against her ribs. She should pull away, maintain the distance that kept her safe. But she couldn't move, couldn't break this fragile moment between them. Victor's fingers intertwined with hers, and she found herself squeezing back. Victor's study was quiet except for the soft crackle of burning wood in the fireplace. His fingers drummed against the polished mahogany desk as he stared at the folder before him. The manila envelope contained photographs that made his blood run cold. Surveillance photos of Zoe meeting with someone he recognized all too well. Marcus, his former lieutenant who had disappeared months ago, was clearly visible in the grainy images. The timestamp showed these meetings happened before the attack at the gala, before Zoe took that bullet for Gia. Victor's jaw clenched. He'd spent weeks letting his guard down around her, showing her parts of himself he'd buried long ago. The tenderness he'd allowed himself to feel now felt like acid in his veins. "Sir," Antonio, his most trusted guard, spoke from the doorway. "She's here." Victor didn't look up. "Bring her in." Zoe entered the room, her steps hesitant. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves, her hair loose around her shoulders. Any other time, the sight of her would have stirred something in him. Now, he felt nothing but ice. "Sit," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, her eyes widening as she noticed the folder. "Victor, what's wrong?" He spread the photos across the desk, one by one, watching her face carefully. Her reaction would tell him everything he needed to know. The color drained from her face as she recognized the images. "I can explain," she whispered. "Can you?" His voice was deadly quiet. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been playing us all for fools. Meeting with Marcus before the attack? The same Marcus who disappeared with half my operation's details?" Zoe's hands trembled. "It's not what you think. Marcus, he approached me months ago, before I even knew who you were. He said he needed information about the security company I worked for." Victor's laugh was hollow. "And you expect me to believe that's all it was? That it's just coincidence he disappeared right before the attack where you conveniently became the hero?" "I didn't know." Zoe's voice cracked. "I swear to you, I had no idea who he really was or what he was planning. When I took that bullet for Gia, it wasn't part of any plan. I would never—" "Never what?" Victor stood, his presence filling the room. "Never betray me? Never lie to me? And yet here we are." He moved around the desk, watching as Zoe shrank back in her chair. The fear in her eyes should have satisfied him, should have confirmed everything he suspected. Instead, it made something in his chest ache. "I've let you into my world," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Showed you things I've never shown anyone else. And all this time, you've been connected to the very people trying to destroy everything I've built." Tears spilled down Zoe's cheeks. "Please, Victor, I'm telling you the truth. I met him twice, maybe 3 times. He asked about security protocols, general stuff anyone could find out. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted it for. When I saw him at the gala that night, I was just as surprised as anyone." Victor gripped the back of her chair, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "Give me one reason why I should believe you." "Because I've never lied to you about anything else," she whispered. "Because every moment since that night has been real. Every conversation, every confession, it's all been real." The sincerity in her voice made Victor's grip tighten on the chair. He wanted to believe her. God help him. He wanted to trust that the connection he'd felt with her wasn't another manipulation, another betrayal waiting to explode in his face. But in his world, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. And Zoe, with her innocent eyes and gentle heart, had somehow become both his greatest weakness and his biggest threat. "You're not leaving this compound until I know exactly what game you've been playing," he said finally. "And if I find out you're lying to me now—" He left the threat unspoken, but they both knew what he was capable of. Victor's office felt like a tomb. Papers scattered across his mahogany desk showed a web of betrayal that made his blood run cold. The evidence was undeniable. Marco, Zoe's childhood friend who'd helped her get the bodyguard position, had been feeding information to Victor's enemies for months. "Bring her to me," Victor commanded, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Minutes later, Zoe was escorted in by 2 guards. She looked confused, maybe even scared, but there was still that defiance in her eyes that both infuriated and captivated him. "Did you know?" The words came out as barely more than a whisper, but they carried enough venom to make Zoe flinch. Know what? She met his gaze steadily, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Victor slammed the papers down in front of her. Your friend Marco, the one who got you this job. He's been working with the Rossi family. He watched as the color drained from her face. Every move we've made, every security detail, every safe house, he knew it all. That's impossible, Zoe whispered, but her voice wavered. Marco wouldn't. He did. Victor circled around her like a predator. And now I have to wonder, how much did you know? Tears welled up in Zoe's eyes. I didn't know anything. Marco was just, he helped me when no one else would. He's dead. Victor's words cut through her protests. I had him killed an hour ago. Zoe's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of his desk to steady herself. The shock on her face was genuine. Victor had learned to read people well enough to know that. But it didn't matter. She was compromised. Whether she knew it or not. You can't leave anymore, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. Not because I'm protecting you, but because you're in too deep now. You're part of this world, whether you want to be or not. Victor, please. No. He grabbed her arm, pulling her closer. You don't understand. The Rossis will come for you now. They'll think you know something, that you were part of Marco's network. And even if they don't, his grip tightened. You're mine. You've been mine since the moment you took that bullet for Gia. He could feel her pulse racing under his fingers, see the way her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. The fear in her eyes should have satisfied him, but instead, it made something in his chest ache. Take her to my private quarters, he ordered the guards. She stays there until I say otherwise. You can't do this! Zoe struggled as the guards moved to grab her arms. Victor, please, I'm not your prisoner. He stepped close, cupping her face with one hand. The touch was gentle, but his eyes were hard as steel. You've always been my prisoner, Zoe. The only difference is now you know it. She was led away, her protests echoing down the hallway. Victor watched her go, his hands clenching into fists. The betrayal cut deep, not because he trusted Marco, but because it had brought him so close to losing her. The thought of Zoe being hurt, being taken from him, he poured himself a drink, trying to steady his nerves. The walls he'd built around his heart were crumbling, and he couldn't stop it. Zoe had worked her way under his skin, past all his defenses. She made him feel things he'd sworn never to feel again after his family's death. But now she was compromised. The only way to keep her safe was to keep her close. So close she couldn't breathe without him knowing. It wasn't just about protection anymore. It was about possession, about claiming what was his. Victor downed his drink in one swallow. Let the Rossis come. Let them try to take her. He would paint the streets red with their blood before he let anyone touch what belonged to him. Victor's footsteps echoed through the marble hallways of his compound, each step heavy with purpose. The morning light filtered through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across his face as he approached his private quarters. Inside, Zoe sat on the edge of a velvet chaise, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. 3 more attacks on our warehouses, Victor announced without preamble, his voice cold and precise. They're getting bolder! Zoe's heart raced. She'd been locked in these quarters for days now, watching Victor's world crumble around them. The betrayals had shaken his empire to its core, and his enemies were taking advantage of every crack in his armor. What does that mean for us? She asked, hating how her voice trembled. Victor's jaw clenched. It means you don't leave these rooms. Not for anything. He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. I can't risk you being exposed. I'm not some precious jewel you can lock away, Zoe protested, though her words lacked their usual fire. The reality of her situation was becoming clearer with each passing day. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore, she was becoming something else entirely. No, Victor agreed, his eyes darkening as they traced her face. You're far more valuable than that. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Victor's men entered, his face grave. Boss, the shipment from Naples. It's been compromised. They're demanding a meeting. Victor's expression hardened into something terrible. Prepare the car. We leave in 10 minutes. He turned to Zoe, his voice brooking no argument. You're coming with me. What? Why? Panic fluttered in her chest. Because keeping you here alone is no longer safe, he said, pulling her to her feet. And because they need to see that I'm not weakened. They need to see what happens when they threaten what's mine. The word mine sent shivers down Zoe's spine. She wanted to protest, to remind him that she wasn't his possession, but the words died in her throat. Something had shifted between them in these past days of forced proximity. She'd seen sides of Victor that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. As they descended to the garage, surrounded by heavily armed guards, Zoe felt the weight of her new reality settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about being Victor's captive anymore. She was becoming a symbol of his power, a piece in his game of chess against those who would destroy him. The bulletproof SUV waited for them, its black exterior gleaming like obsidian. Victor's hand pressed against her lower back as he guided her inside, his touch both protective and possessive. As they pulled away from the compound, Zoe caught sight of her reflection in the tinted windows. She barely recognized herself anymore. You're afraid, Victor observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Wouldn't you be? She challenged, meeting his gaze in the darkness of the car. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Fear keeps you alive in this world, but you're stronger than you know, Zoe. His hand found hers in the shadows, fingers intertwining with an intimacy that made her breath catch. You've proven that more than once. The city passed by in a blur of gray buildings and morning traffic. Zoe felt the tension building with every mile, knowing they were driving straight into danger. But there was something else, too. A strange sense of belonging. She wasn't just Victor's prisoner anymore. She was becoming part of his world, understanding its rules and rhythms in ways that both terrified and thrilled her. Whatever happens today, Victor said as they approached their destination, stay close to me. Don't trust anyone else. His grip on her hand tightened. You're part of this now, whether you chose it or not. And that was the truth that Zoe couldn't escape. She hadn't chosen this life, but it had chosen her. As they pulled up to Tessa, the meeting location, she straightened her spine, knowing that every eye would be on her. She was no longer just the woman who took a bullet for Victor's daughter. She was becoming something more. A symbol of Victor's power, a target for his enemies, and perhaps most dangerously, someone he couldn't bear to lose. Victor's study was bathed in the dim glow of evening light. Maps and photographs littered his mahogany desk, each marking potential threats to his empire. His fingers traced the edge of a recent surveillance photo, his enemies gathering at the docks, their intentions clear. They're moving weapons through the east side, Antonio, his most trusted lieutenant, reported. Heavy artillery. They're preparing for war. Victor's jaw clenched. The threat to Zoe wasn't just about hurting him anymore. It had become personal. His enemies had seen his weakness, how he looked at her, how he protected her. They would use that against him. Double the security detail around the compound, Victor ordered, his voice carrying the chill of winter. I want eyes on every entrance, every exit. No one gets within a mile of this place without me knowing. The room fell silent as Victor moved to the window, his reflection hard and unforgiving in the glass. 5 of his most trusted men waited for his next command, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "Marco, take your team to the warehouse district. Smoke them out." Victor's orders were precise, calculated. "But leave their leader alive. He's mine." "Boss," Marco nodded, understanding the implied brutality in Victor's words. Victor turned back to the room, his presence commanding absolute attention. "They thought they could use her against me." His voice dropped dangerously low. "They thought they found my weakness." The men shifted uncomfortably. They'd seen Victor angry before. But this was different. This was cold, calculated rage, the kind that ended in blood. "I want every rat, every traitor, every person who even thought about touching her, found and eliminated." Victor's words carried the weight of death. "Send a message. What's mine stays mine." Reports continued flowing in. Enemy movements, potential hideouts, suspected traitors within their own ranks. Victor absorbed it all, building his strategy with the precision of a master chess player. But beneath his cool exterior, something burned. A possessive, protective fury that threatened to consume him. "The Castellanos family is backing them," Antonio added, sliding forward another photograph. "They're providing weapons, men, resources." Victor picked up the photo, studying the face of his old enemy. The Castellanos had always wanted his territory, his power. Now they thought they'd found his weakness in Zoe. Then the Castellanos fall first. Victor's decision was final. Hit their operations tonight, all of them, simultaneously. The room erupted into controlled chaos as orders were given, teams assembled, strategies refined. Victor remained at his desk, a dark anchor in the storm of activity. His mind wasn't on the tactics or the coming violence. It was on Zoe, sleeping just 2 floors above them, unaware of the war about to break loose. "One more thing," Victor called out as his men prepared to leave. They froze, waiting. "If anything happens to her while I'm gone." He left the threat unfinished. But its meaning was clear. As his lieutenants filed out, Victor remained in his study, staring at the city lights beyond his window. Everything he'd built, every life he'd taken, every deal he'd made, it all seemed to pale in comparison to keeping her safe. The realization should have frightened him, should have felt like weakness. Instead, it fueled him, gave him purpose beyond mere power and control. He needed to see her, to make sure she was safe, to tell her. What? That she'd become more than just an obsession? That somehow, in the midst of all this darkness, she'd become his light? Victor straightened, his jacket, his decision made. Before the night turned to blood, before he unleashed hell on his enemies, he needed to face the truth he'd been avoiding. He needed to face Zoe. Victor's black SUV carved through the empty streets of the city, a convoy of armored vehicles following behind. The night air crackled with tension. Inside, Zoe sat beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd refused to stay behind, and Victor, after a fierce argument, had relented. "Stay close to Marco," Victor ordered, his voice glacial as he checked his weapon. "If anything happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you," Zoe interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. His dark eyes found hers, something dangerous and possessive flickering in their depths. The SUV pulled up to a warehouse district, and Victor's expression hardened into something inhuman. "Remember what I told you," he said, then stepped out into the night. The assault began with precision. Victor's men moved like shadows, taking out the perimeter guards without a sound. Zoe stayed close to Marco, Victor's most trusted lieutenant, watching as Victor led the charge. He moved with lethal grace, each shot finding its mark. The rival family had been expecting them. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night's silence. Bullets pinged off metal and concrete, the air filled with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. Zoe pressed herself against a wall, her breath coming in short gasps. She watched as Victor transformed completely into the monster everyone feared. He executed his enemies with cold efficiency, showing no mercy. Blood splattered across his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice. "Move!" Marco yanked her down as bullets sprayed overhead. Victor's voice cut through the chaos, issuing commands in Italian. His men responded instantly, closing ranks and pressing forward. The rival family's defenses crumbled under the assault. Their leader, cornered like a rat, begged for mercy. Victor approached him, slowly, his shoes leaving bloody footprints on the concrete floor. Zoe couldn't look away as Victor pressed his gun to the man's forehead. "You threatened what's mine?" Victor said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You will never make that mistake again." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. Zoe flinched, but she didn't look away. This was Victor's world. Brutal, unforgiving, and soaked in blood. And somehow, impossibly, she had become part of it. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Victor's men secured the area, eliminating any remaining threats. Bodies littered the ground, and the air was thick with gun smoke and death. Victor turned to her, his face spattered with blood. His eyes searched her face, looking for fear or disgust. Instead, he found understanding. This was who he was. Both the man who touched her with surprising gentleness and the monster who would kill to protect what he considered his. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern as he approached her. Zoe shook her head, unable to speak. Victor reached for her, his bloody hand hovering near her face before dropping away. He wouldn't touch her. Not while covered in the evidence of his violence. "This is what I am," he said quietly, only for her ears. "This is the world I live in. The world I've dragged you into." "I know," Zoe replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I chose to stay." Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded to Marco, who immediately began coordinating the cleanup. Bodies would disappear, evidence would vanish, and by morning it would be as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Zoe had witnessed Victor in his element, had seen the full extent of his power and brutality, and still she remained by his side, understanding now that his violence was as much a part of him as his unexpected moments of tenderness. The night wasn't over, but the worst of the bloodshed was done. Victor's enemies lay dead, and his message was clear. Anyone who dared threaten what belonged to him would meet the same fate. Victor stood at the window of his private study, his silhouette stark against the fading sunlight. The chaos of the day had settled into an uneasy quiet. Behind him, Zoe sat in one of the leather armchairs, her hands wrapped around a glass of water, the ice long since melted. "I was 12 when they died," Victor said, breaking the silence. His voice carried none of its usual steel. "My parents, they were murdered in their own home." Zoe watched him, seeing past the rigid set of his shoulders to the wounded boy beneath. "I'm so sorry, Victor." He turned slightly, his profile shadowed. "They tortured my father first, made my mother watch." His knuckles whitened against the window frame. "I was hidden in a secret room behind the pantry. Heard everything." The admission hung heavy in the air. Zoe's heart ached for the child he'd been, forced to listen to such horror. "That's why you built all this," she said softly. "The empire, the protection, the walls." "Yes." He finally turned to face her. "I swore I would never be helpless again." Zoe shifted in her chair, her own painful memories surfacing. I understand feeling helpless. Different reason, though. She gave a bitter laugh. Kids can be cruel when you don't fit their idea of normal. Victor's eyes fixed on her, intense and focused. Tell me. I was always the big girl, the fat one. She shrugged, but the old hurt was evident in her voice. Started in elementary school. The names, the jokes, being left out. By high school, I'd learned to make myself invisible. Easier that way. Victor moved closer, his presence both intimidating and oddly comforting. You're not invisible anymore. No, she agreed. Hard to be invisible when you're being held captive by a mafia boss. But there was no bite to her words, just a tired acceptance. Is that still how you see it? Captivity? Zoe met his gaze. I don't know anymore. Everything's different now. Victor sat in the chair opposite her, closer than he needed to be. I remember every night after they died. The silence, the emptiness. His voice dropped lower. I learned to trust no one. Love made you weak. Caring made you vulnerable. And now? Zoe asked, barely breathing. Now. He reached out, his fingers brushing her hand. Now I'm not so sure. The touch sent electricity through her skin. I spent years building walls too, she admitted. Different kind of walls, but walls all the same. Keeping people at a distance so they couldn't hurt me. And yet you took a bullet for Gia without hesitation. That was different. She needed protection. She's innocent in all this. Victor's hand tightened on hers. Like I was once. Like you were. The words hit home, and Zoe felt tears prick at her eyes. We're not those scared kids anymore. No, Victor agreed, but their ghosts are still with us. They sat in companionable silence, their hands still linked, each lost in their own memories but somehow less alone in sharing them. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, but for once, the darkness didn't feel threatening. I used to dream about escaping, Zoe said quietly, running away from everything that hurt me. But you can't really escape yourself, can you? Victor's thumb traced circles on her palm. No, you can only become stronger than your fears. The intimacy of the moment was startling in its intensity. Here they were, two broken people who had found something unexpected in each other's pain. Understanding, connection, maybe even healing. Victor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, his silhouette dark against the city lights below. His shoulders were rigid, hands clasped behind his back. A pose Zoe had come to recognize as his attempt to contain his rage. Marco betrayed us. His voice was ice-cold, cutting through the silence. My own godfather! Zoe watched him from her position, on the leather sofa, her heart aching at the raw pain beneath his controlled exterior. Marco had been more than just an ally. He'd been family. The man who'd helped raise Victor after his parents' deaths. He's been working with the Castellanos this whole time. Victor's fist connected with the window, making the glass shudder. Planning to take everything I built, everything my father built. The betrayal hit differently than the others. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Marco had been at Victor's side for decades, had watched him grow from a grieving boy into the powerful man he was today. I trusted him. Victor's voice cracked slightly. I let him close to Gia, to you. Zoe rose from the sofa, ignoring the twinge from her healing wounds. She approached Victor carefully, noting how his muscles tensed at her proximity. We found evidence that he's been siphoning money for months, Victor continued, his knuckles white against the window frame. Setting up dummy corporations, moving pieces into place. He's been planning this since before the first attack. The revelation settled heavily in the room. Marco's betrayal explained so much. The coordinated attacks, the inside information their enemies seemed to have. He'd been the serpent in their garden all along. "I should have seen it," Victor growled. "All those meetings he insisted on handling alone, the way he pushed against having you around." Zoe reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. Victor didn't pull away, but she felt him trembling beneath her touch. "He was family," she said softly. "You trusted him because that's what family does." Victor turned to her then, his eyes dark with fury and hurt. "Family?" He spat the word like poison. "Family died with my parents. Everyone else? They're just waiting for their chance to strike." The bitterness in his voice made Zoe's chest tighten. She understood now why Victor kept such rigid control, why he struggled to let anyone close. Every person he'd ever trusted had either died or betrayed him. "He knows everything," Victor continued, running a hand through his hair. "Every weakness, every vulnerability. He knows about the safe houses, the offshore accounts." His gaze fixed on Zoe. "He knows about you." The implication was clear. Marco knew exactly how to hurt Victor now, and Zoe was at the top of that list. We intercepted his last communication with the Castellanos. Victor moved to his desk, pulling out a folder. He's planned a meeting for tomorrow night. They're going to finalize their alliance. Zoe watched as Victor's facade cracked further, revealing the wounded man beneath the monster. This wasn't just about business or territory anymore. This was about survival, about protecting what was his. "I have to end this," he said, his voice hollow. "Before he can—" Victor cut himself off, but Zoe heard the unspoken words, "before he can take you from me." The weight of the situation pressed down on them both. Marco's betrayal wasn't just another power play. It was a reminder that in Victor's world, trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. And yet, here they were, two broken people finding solace in each other despite everything. Victor's office was silent, except for the steady tick of an antique clock. He stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense as he stared out at the city below. The recent betrayal had shaken his empire to its core, and now he was backed into a corner. His fingers drummed against the crystal tumbler in his hand, ice cubes clinking softly against the glass. "Get me Lorenzo Castellano on the phone," he ordered, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. His lieutenant hesitated for a moment before making the call. Everyone knew that dealing with Lorenzo was like dancing with the devil. The man was as unpredictable as he was dangerous. Zoe watched from her position on the leather couch, her heart racing. She'd never seen Victor like this before, his usual cold, control cracking around the edges. The betrayal of his former ally had hit him harder than he'd admit. "You don't have to be here for this," Victor said, his eyes meeting hers in the window's reflection. There was something different in his gaze, a flicker of concern that hadn't been there before. "I'm not leaving," Zoe replied firmly, though her hands twisted nervously in her lap. She'd grown stronger in her time here, learned to stand her ground even when Victor's presence filled the room with tension. The phone call was brief, but the agreement was made. A meeting was set at neutral ground, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Victor's jaw clenched as he hung up the phone, and Zoe could see the calculations running behind his eyes. "You'll stay close to me," he commanded, moving to stand before her. "Lorenzo is unpredictable, but he has the resources we need to eliminate our problem." His hand reached out, fingers grazing her cheek in an uncharacteristically gentle gesture. "I won't let anything happen to you." The restaurant was a monument to old-world luxury, all crystal chandeliers and dark wood paneling. Lorenzo Castellano sat at a private table in the back, his security detail positioned strategically around the room. He stood as Victor approached, Zoe close behind. Victor Salvatore. Lorenzo's voice was smooth as silk, but his eyes were sharp as razors. And this must be the woman I've heard so much about. His gaze lingered on Zoe, making her skin crawl. Victor's hand found the small of her back, a possessive gesture that was both protective and warning. The deal. Lorenzo, let's discuss terms. The negotiation that followed was tense, each word carefully chosen. Lorenzo wanted access to Victor's shipping routes in exchange for his help in eliminating the threat. The stakes were high. One wrong move could start a war that would paint the streets red. And, as a show of good faith, Lorenzo added, his smile not reaching his eyes, perhaps the lovely Zoe could join my family for dinner next week? My wife is quite curious about the woman who's captured the great Victor Salvatore's attention. Victor's fingers dug into Zoe's back, and she felt him stiffen beside her. Zoe isn't part of this deal, he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. Everything is part of the deal, my friend, Lorenzo replied smoothly. Trust must go both ways, yes? Zoe could feel the tension radiating off Victor in waves. She knew he was trapped. Refusing would show weakness, accepting would put her at risk. Before he could respond, she spoke up. I would be honored to accept your invitation, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Victor's eyes snapped to her face, a storm of emotions brewing behind his usually controlled expression. She could see fury there, and fear, emotions he rarely showed to anyone. The deal was sealed with handshakes and false smiles. But Zoe knew this was just the beginning. As they left the restaurant, Victor's grip on her arm was almost painful. You shouldn't have done that, he hissed, pulling her close. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. But Zoe did understand. She understood that she was now a player in this dangerous game, whether Victor liked it or not. She was no longer just the woman who took a bullet for his daughter. She was becoming something more, something that could either strengthen or destroy everything Victor had built. The night was thick with tension as Victor's men surrounded the abandoned warehouse. Zoe's heart hammered in her chest as she watched from the safety of Victor's armored car, her fingers pressed against the cold window. Victor had insisted she stay in the vehicle, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding before her. Victor emerged from the shadows, his tall frame cutting an imposing figure against the dim streetlights. His face was set in stone, that familiar coldness etched into every line. But Zoe knew better now. She could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. The warehouse door creaked open, and Marco, Victor's former right-hand man, was dragged out by two burly enforcers. His face was already bloodied, evidence of a struggle that had happened before Zoe arrived. The sight made her stomach turn, but she couldn't look away. You disappointed me, Marco, Victor's voice carried across the empty lot, eerily calm. All these years of loyalty, thrown away for what? Money? Power? Marco spat blood onto the concrete. You've gone soft, Victor. Ever since that fat bitch came into your life. The crack of Victor's fist connecting with Marco's jaw echoed through the night. Zoe flinched, but her eyes remained fixed on Victor. His composure had cracked, revealing the fury underneath. Her name is Zoe, Victor growled, grabbing Marco by the throat. And you tried to have her killed. You betrayed me, threatened my daughter, endangered the woman I... He stopped himself, but Zoe's breath caught in her throat at the unfinished sentence. Marco laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Look at you! The great Victor Salvatore, brought to his knees by some nobody. Your enemies smell weakness. They're coming for you. For her. Victor's movement was lightning fast. The gun appeared in his hand as if by magic, pressed against Marco's temple. They can try, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. But first, you're going to tell me everything. Every name, every plan, every detail of their operation. What followed was brutal. Zoe watched as Victor systematically broke Marco down, extracting information through methods that made her skin crawl. Yet she couldn't deny the strange comfort in knowing that this man, this dangerous, violent man, would go to these lengths to protect her. Marco's screams echoed through the night, each confession punctuated by another blow. Victor's men stood silent, faces impassive, as their boss dismantled the traitor piece by piece. This was the world Zoe had fallen into, a world where betrayal was paid for in blood and loyalty was everything. Finally, when Marco had nothing left to give, Victor stepped back. His pristine suit was spattered with blood, his knuckles raw. He looked at Marco with the kind of coldness that Zoe hadn't seen since her early days in his compound. "You forgot one thing, Marco," Victor said, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate calm. "I didn't become soft. I found something worth protecting." His eyes flickered to the car where Zoe sat, and for a moment their gazes met through the glass. "And that makes me more dangerous than ever." The gunshot that followed was almost anticlimactic. Marco's body crumpled to the ground, and Victor tucked his weapon away with the same efficiency he showed in board meetings. He barked orders to his men in Italian, and they quickly began cleaning up the scene. Zoe sat frozen in the car, processing everything she'd witnessed. She should have been terrified, disgusted, desperate to escape. Instead, she felt a complicated mix of emotions. Horror at the violence, yes, but also a deep, unsettling sense of security. Victor would burn the world down to keep her safe. And that knowledge was both frightening and oddly comforting. The warehouse loomed dark against the night sky, its metal walls echoing with the sound of approaching footsteps. Victor moved like a shadow, his suit pristine despite the chaos that had led to this moment. His men flanked him, weapons ready, but this was personal. The rival boss waited inside, and only one of them would walk away alive. Zoe watched from the car, her heart hammering against her ribs. Victor had ordered her to stay behind, but she couldn't, not now, not when everything hung by a thread. She followed at a distance, staying hidden in the shadows as Victor disappeared into the building. The first gunshot shattered the silence. Inside, Victor faced his enemy across a concrete floor stained with years of violence. Antonio Castellano, the man who had orchestrated every attack, every betrayal, stood with a smirk that spoke of assured victory. "You brought this on yourself, Salvatore," Antonio sneered, his gun trained on Victor's chest. "You've grown weak. That woman made you soft." Victor's face remained impassive, but his eyes burned with cold fury. "You made one mistake, Antonio. You threatened what's mine." The fight erupted like a storm. Bullets tore through the air as both men dove for cover. Victor's shoulder caught a round, but he didn't flinch. He returned fire with deadly precision, years of survival instinct guiding his hand. Zoe crept closer to the warehouse entrance, the sounds of combat drawing her forward despite her fear. Through a broken window, she could see flashes of movement, hear the brutal exchange of gunfire and flesh meeting flesh as the fight turned personal. Victor and Antonio crashed through wooden crates, their guns forgotten as they grappled with savage intensity. Blood sprayed across the floor. Victor's blood. A knife had appeared in Antonio's hand, finding its mark in Victor's side. But Victor was beyond pain now. He fought with the raw fury of a man who had lost everything once before and refused to lose again. His fist connected with Antonio's jaw, sending the rival boss staggering. The knife clattered to the ground. "You think you can take her from me?" Victor's voice was barely human as he advanced on his wounded opponent. "You think you can destroy what's mine?" Antonio spat blood and laughed. "Look at you, the great Victor Salvatore, ready to die for some fat buy." The words died in his throat as Victor's hands found his neck. The crack of bone echoed through the warehouse, final and absolute. Antonio's body crumpled to the floor, his eyes still wide with surprise. Victor stood over his fallen enemy, swaying slightly as blood soaked through his expensive suit. The warehouse spun around him, and he stumbled, catching himself against a pillar. "Victor!" Zoe's voice cut through the haze of pain and violence. She ran to him, her hands already reaching to support his weight as his knees buckled. "I told you to stay in the car," he growled. But there was no strength behind the words. His face was pale, blood loss taking its toll. "Shut up!" Zoe snapped, pressing her hands against the wound in his side. "I'm not letting you die here." Victor's men rushed in, securing the scene. But Zoe's focus remained entirely on the man bleeding in her arms. His eyes, usually so cold and controlled, were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Zoe," he whispered, his bloodied hand reaching up to touch her cheek, "you shouldn't have to see this. Any of this. I'm already part of this world," she replied, her voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "I'm part of your world." The medical team Victor's men had called burst through the door, but Victor refused to let go of Zoe's hand as they worked to stabilize him. He held onto her like she was his lifeline, his anchor in a sea of violence and pain. And perhaps she was. The marble floors of the Salvatore mansion echoed with Victor's footsteps as he strode through the halls, his presence commanding attention from every guard and servant. The past weeks of bloodshed had changed things. The rival families had been crushed, their territories absorbed into his empire. But it wasn't just his empire anymore. His eyes found Zoe across the grand meeting room, where she sat at the head of the table beside his empty chair. She'd changed too. No longer the frightened woman who'd taken a bullet for his daughter. Now she carried herself with quiet confidence, her curves wrapped in an elegant black dress that spoke of both power and grace. "The Russo family has surrendered," Victor announced, his voice carrying across the room. His lieutenants straightened in their chairs, but his attention remained fixed on Zoe. "Their territory is ours." Zoe met his gaze steadily, and he felt that familiar surge of possession mixed with pride. She'd proven herself time and again during the war, showing a strategic mind that complemented his brutal efficiency. Where he brought fear, she brought loyalty. Where he destroyed, she built alliances. "And the other families?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. "They've seen what happens to those who oppose us." Victor's lips curved into a cold smile as he took his seat beside her. "They've pledged their allegiance." The room hummed with tension as Victor's hand found Zoe's under the table, their fingers intertwining. It was a private gesture in a public moment, but it spoke volumes. The feared Mafia boss and the woman who'd changed everything. Together they'd rebuilt his empire into something stronger. "Tell them," Zoe murmured, loud enough only for him to hear. Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Standing again, he addressed his assembled captains. "From this day forward, Zoe stands as my equal in all matters concerning the family. Her word is my word. Her orders are my orders." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Anyone who questions this will answer to me personally." The declaration sent ripples through the room. Some nodded in approval, while others shifted uncomfortably. But no one dared speak against it. They'd all witnessed Zoe's transformation from outsider to leader. They'd seen how she tempered Victor's worst impulses while maintaining the iron control necessary in their world. "The war is over," Victor continued. "Our enemies are dead or subjugated. The Salvatore family rules unopposed." His grip on Zoe's hand tightened, but this is just the beginning. As the meeting concluded and the captains filed out, Victor remained seated beside Zoe. The room emptied until they were alone. the weight of their victory settling around them like a familiar cloak. "You've changed everything," Victor said quietly, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "This empire, it's different with you here." Zoe turned to face him, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. "We've changed it together. You're not the same man who locked me away all those months ago." Victor leaned into her touch, his eyes dark with memory. No, that man was a monster who knew nothing but violence and control. His voice roughened. "You showed me there was another way. You showed me my own strength," Zoe countered. "I never thought I could belong in this world. But with you—" She trailed off, words unnecessary between them. The silence stretched, comfortable and intimate. Outside these walls, they were the feared leaders of the most powerful criminal empire in the city. But here, in this moment, they were simply Victor and Zoe, two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other's darkness. Victor stood, pulling Zoe to her feet beside him. They faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Their city, now. His empire had been built on blood and violence. But with Zoe by his side, it would be maintained through something stronger: loyalty, trust, and the unshakable bond between them. The mansion's grand study bathed in the warm glow of sunset, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors. Zoe sat in a plush leather armchair, watching Victor as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. His broad shoulders, wrapped in an expertly tailored suit, carried the weight of his empire with practiced ease now. The tension that once haunted him had mellowed into something more controlled, more purposeful. "Come here," Victor called to her, his voice softer than it used to be, though still carrying that edge of command that never quite left him. Zoe rose, her steps confident as she crossed the room. Gone were the days when she would hesitate, when fear would make her pause. The woman who had once been trapped in this world had grown into someone who commanded it alongside him. Victor's arm slipped around her waist as she reached him, pulling her close against his side. Below them, the sprawling estate stretched out like a kingdom. Guards patrolled the perimeter, a constant reminder of the world they lived in, but their presence no longer felt like a cage to Zoe. This was their sanctuary now. "Remember when you first brought me here?" Zoe asked, leaning into his warmth. "I was so scared." Victor's chest rumbled with a low chuckle. "You tried to escape 3 times in the first week, and you caught me every time." She smiled, tracing her fingers along his arm. "I never thought we'd end up here." "Neither did I." Victor turned to face her, his ice-blue eyes softening as they met hers. "You changed everything, Zoe. My world was nothing but darkness before you." The setting sun painted golden streaks across his face, highlighting the small scars that told stories of battles won and lost. Zoe reached up, touching one near his jaw that he'd gotten defending her during their last great war. His empire was secure now, their enemies either dead or allied, but the cost had been high. "We both changed," she said softly. "You're not the same man who locked me away in that room." Victor's grip tightened slightly at the memory. "No, I'm not. That man was afraid of losing control, of feeling anything." Zoe looked out over their domain. The gardens below were in full bloom, a stark contrast to the security measures hidden within their beauty. This was their world now, a perfect balance of danger and peace, power and tenderness. Just like them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Taking that bullet for Gia? Getting pulled into all of this?" Victor turned her in his arms, his hands spanning her waist. "You know I don't allow regrets, Maya Lubov." The Russian endearment rolled off his tongue like honey. "Everything that happened brought us here, made us who we are." She nodded, remembering the path that had led them to this moment. How the grudge, violence, the betrayals, the moments of tender revelation between bullets and blood, they had forged something unbreakable in that crucible of chaos. "The family respects you now," Victor continued, pride evident in his voice. "They see what I saw. Strength, loyalty, courage. You're not just my wife. You're their queen." Zoe smiled at that. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. How she'd gone from an outsider to someone the most dangerous people in the world bowed to. Not because of fear, like they did with Victor, but because of the way she'd proven herself time and again. "We built this together," she said, gesturing to the empire spread out before them. "Everything we have, everything we are, it's ours, both of us." Victor's eyes darkened with intensity, that familiar look that still made her breath catch. "Yes," he agreed, his voice dropping to that dangerous velvet tone that was only for her. "Together." The word hung between them, heavy with promise and memory. They stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of red and gold, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and carved out their own destiny.